All right. Well, good morning, Rotary District 7770, and welcome to Conversations with Rotary Action People for Monday, February 22nd. My name is Donald Hovis. I'm your CWRAP host, and I'm from the Chicora Rotary Club in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. We're pleased to be joined from the Columbia area today by Mr. Ron Hill. Sir, we look forward to your presentation in just a moment. We're going to do some announcements. I'll do your bio and we'll be on to your presentation, sir. But excited to have you with us, and thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
So February 22nd, does someone know what today is? Mary knows what it is. Well, if you're a margarita fan, it's your day today, National Margarita Day. Okay, so I'm sitting about 50 feet from the ocean right now. So grab that margarita this afternoon and celebrate. But introducing your CWRAP team, our public image chair from the 5 Points Rotary Club as well, along with our speaker today, Miss Mary Gask. Mary, thank you for setting up this interview today. Looking forward to it. All right, so I'm going to read your bio now, Mr. Ron. So stay tuned here, folks. Okay. A 49-year veteran of radio and marketing, Ron Hill is a media and entertainment executive with 25 years of experience with iHeart Media, one of the country's largest entertainment companies and the largest owner and operator of radio stations in the United States, with over 850 radio stations located in 160 cities across the country. When I listen to normal radio, sorry, Ron, I listened a lot to satellite radio, but if I'm listening to regular radio, it's an iHeart station here in Myrtle Beach. So Ron's broadcasting career started in 1973 in his hometown of Moundsville, West Virginia, as a disc jockey. He's a Thundering Herd graduate, 1988 graduate of Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. He's worked in various positions in radio programming, sales and management in West Virginia, Illinois, Tennessee, Florida, New Mexico, Mississippi, and South Carolina. In his role as area president of the iHeart Media Markets Group in the Carolinas, Ron oversees the company's operations of 24 radio stations in Charleston, Columbia, Florence, and Myrtle Beach. So you know Gator 107.9 when I say Gator 107.9. He is highly skilled in the use of digital, social, mobile, podcasting, and broadcast media. And he creates strategic plans for successful advertising campaigns for businesses across the country. As I mentioned earlier, Ron is a member of the 5 Points Rotary Club in Columbia, where he currently serves on the board of directors. He is also on the board of directors of the South Carolina Broadcasters Association, the Indian Waters Council, Boy Scouts of America. We have another thing in common. Salvation Army of the Midlands. I'm on Salvation Army of Horry County, and the Communications Committee for the United Way of the Midlands. Ron and his wife, Jackie, they live in Blythewood, and they call the Midlands home for the past 9 years. They have 3 sons and 4 granddaughters. He enjoys singing, golfing, playing the guitar, and playing with his miniature Schnauzer and German Shepherd. Ron, glad to have you with us, sir.
Donald, thanks so much. I really appreciate that introduction this morning. I'm happy to be here and to share a little bit of my life's experience and what's happening in our industry as far as radio is concerned. I'm going to share my screen here so we can talk a little bit about it. When Mary and I were talking over the weekend, what we wanted to talk about was basically some of the things that are happening with AM radio and some of the things that were tied in directly with the news you heard this past week about Rush Limbaugh and him passing away. Hang on here just a second, folks. Unfortunately, when I'm in presentation mode, I can't do anything to turn my microphone off. That's not a good thing, is it? Let's talk a little bit about the history of radio here and find out a little bit about what's going on with radio, because with things that have happened in our industry, Rush Limbaugh was a major part of what happened in radio as far as AM radio is concerned. We go back into the early part of the 20th century. Back in 1912, a gentleman called Frank Conrad made a $5 bet with another guy, Thomas Perkins. They worked together at Westinghouse, and basically his wager was that he could set up this new thing that they were going to call radio, tinkering with some materials in his garage in Wilkinsburg, Pennsylvania. He created a small receiver capable of picking up signals from the U.S. Naval Observatory in Arlington, Virginia. He won the bet. Obviously, he won the $5. He went on to design bigger and better radios for Westinghouse. And in turn, Westinghouse became a key player in turning what was his hobby and that of a few hundred radio enthusiasts into an industry that changed the world. Fast forward through the 50s and 60s, obviously, radio went through a lot of changes. If you were listening to radio back in the 40s and 50s, you had entertainment radio in terms of talk radio. You also had a lot of music going on because they would often bring in live bands and have music. That went on to where radio was using 45 RPM records and other records and playing those records for entertainment. There's still a lot of talk going on, but it was all AM radio. And then FM, another spectrum into the radio scale, came in the 60s and really started to incorporate itself into our lives. And by 1967, the Federal Communications Commission required radio station operators to have different programming on their AM and FM frequencies. Up until that time, we could rebroadcast whatever we wanted to on AM and FM, and nobody seemed to care. And then the FCC decided that we needed to separate that. So what you had happen was the music formats moved over to the FM dial because the sound was better, and that was where programmers weren't limited to playing 2 and 3 short-minute pop songs. They could play basically long album cuts and different music like that. And so FM really became something where the music was going, and AM radio went into a different direction. It stayed with news and talk and sports. And it really didn't matter to people when they were listening to AM or FM as far as news and talk and sports were concerned. AM wasn't quite as clear of a radio dial as FM, but that was okay for that type of programming. But for music programming, people decided that they really preferred listening to music programming on FM radio stations. So that began back in 1967, what became a multiple year decline for AM radio stations. Several of them started going out of business each year. We look back at 2015, there were only 4,684 AM stations left, while there were many, many more, 6,701 commercial FM stations that were thriving. And there were also an additional 4,095 educational FM stations. And at that point in time, 1,433 low power FM stations. And so FM was really at that point, and it still is today, where there are probably 3 to 4 to 1 the number of FM stations over AM stations in the country. If I remember back when I was in high school and going to college in the mid 70s, a lot of us in our cars going into the early 70s, we went out and we bought an FM converter because cars at that point in time came with AM radios. And so you couldn't pick up FM, but you could go to Radio Shack or someplace like that, buy yourself an inexpensive FM converter, and then all of a sudden be able to pick up all of those FM stations. Shortly after that, automobile manufacturers caught on to the fact that people really wanted to listen to FM. And because of that, they started introducing FM radios into cars. And FM just continued to grow and grow and grow in listenership. And there came a point in time in the 80s that the amount of people listening to FM radio just totally overwhelmed the amount of people listening to AM radio. So those of us in the industry were looking at AM radio, and we're trying to find ways to program AM radio trying to find ways to program it and make it better. And, you know, in doing that, we look in amongst our own ranks of people who work in and around the industry. And along comes this guy by the name of Rush Limbaugh. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about Rush this morning, but this isn't a political discussion. Something that I wanted to point out to you folks is that really, in terms of broadcasting and the radio industry, Rush Limbaugh wasn't as much a politician as you may think. As a matter of fact, when I was working for another radio group back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I looked at possibly adding Rush to our lineup at the radio stations that I had, in talking to Rush's management company, one of the things that they pointed out is that Rush really is more of an entertainer than he is a political figure. And look, to really understand that, you have to kind of look at where he came from. He was born in Cape Girardeau, Missouri back in 1951. He started in high school, same way that I did. In high school, we had an intramural radio station that I was a part of, and he had the same thing in his high school. He went under the name of Rusty Sharp. One of the things that Mary may know and other people who talk to people within the radio industry is we don't always use our real names when we're on the air. It's quite common that radio personalities will change their name for privacy more than anything else. So he had the name of Rusty Sharp and used that name for a few years. He went on to go to college at Southeast Missouri State, but he dropped out after a year. He began what we call a nomadic radio existence because he was moving around from different radio stations. He was at a radio station in McKeesport, Pennsylvania for a while. He had some other radio gigs. And then after a while, he dropped out of radio. And he went to work in the ticketing office for the Kansas City Royals. And he worked there for several years. And he was somebody, as far as a person was concerned, he was somebody that had a lot of particular beliefs. He didn't mind telling you the way he felt on certain things. But in all, he was somebody that was somewhat of an entertainer. His big breakthrough came in 1984 when he landed at KFBK in Sacramento, and he started to build a following. At that point in time, the difference between what he was doing and what other conservative talk radio hosts were doing was pretty unique. His type of conservative talk was greatly aided by the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987. I don't know if any of you on this call are familiar with the Fairness Doctrine, but with the Fairness Doctrine, we in the broadcasting industry in both radio and television, basically the FCC had guidelines that basically set it up for us where if we presented something of a conservative nature on the radio for, let's say, 15 minutes, then we would have to have equal time for somebody with an opposing liberal view that they would have to be on the radio for 15 minutes. And while we were allowed to have a conversation with them, we were not taking a position of being liberal or conservative ourselves, but rather what we were doing was just moderating a discussion. When the Fairness Doctrine was repealed during the Reagan administration, basically that took those handcuffs off of our industry and allowed people within the industry to finally have their own voice and speak for themselves. So along comes Rush Limbaugh. And what does Rush Limbaugh do? Rush Limbaugh, as I mentioned, was an entertainer. He was looking for an audience. He was trying to find a way to separate himself from other people. As we talked about, and been very, very, very successful since he left college, and he had several jobs. And when he decided to get back into radio, he did something differently that other people hadn't done before. Talk radio formats at that point basically had a host, and that host would interview different guests throughout the course of the day. And it wasn't so much focused in on the host as it was focused in on the guest. But Rush Limbaugh did it differently. He decided that he would be the key player to what he was talking about. He did very, very well out in California. In 1988, EFM Media Management signed him to an agreement, brought him in for 2 years to work in New York. And basically, there in New York City. They decided they were on WABC in New York. They set up to actually syndicate the show to a network of 56 different radio stations. Now, here's where Rush's influence on AM radio and the path of AM radio in our lifetimes has changed. Within 5 years, that 3-hour program became the most popular talk show on radio. The number of radio stations that he was on in 5 years grew from 56 to well over 400. And basically the estimated listening audience that they had at that point in time was over 20 million weekly listeners. He was a very, very good entertainer. Instead of having those regular hosts, regular guests, he would fill his program with a lot of political commentary, a lot of satire, and a heavy dose of what he was doing himself. And occasionally we'd have another guest come by here and then, but usually it was somebody that was high profile inside of the broadcasting industry. He did become influential in politics because of the voice that he had. His rhetoric going back to the 1994 election is credited with helping sell Newt Gingrich's contract with America to voters and enabling Republicans to gain majorities in both the House and the Senate. Back in 2008, his number of radio stations kept growing and his contracts kept growing, and he went all the way through this past year, celebrating his 32nd year as in national syndication in radio. And throughout that period of time, he became an ambassador for our media. He went outside of radio, did a lot of other things too. He hosted a national television show from 1992 to 96. He spent some time as a football commentator for ESPN a few weeks in 1993, and he wrote several books. A lot of those books were bestsellers. He went along beyond that to be inducted in the Radio Hall of Fame, and along with that also was given the presidential, the Presidential Award of Freedom, Presidential Medal for Freedom this past year. Over a period of 2 decades, he became the #1 talk radio host in America, and his show aired on over 600 radio stations weekly and reached consistently over 16 million listeners each month. And when we think about it, like I said, Rush Limbaugh was an entertainer. And many of you may look at him and think, well, no, Rush Limbaugh was a politician. Well, he often had opportunities where he could take up politics and move into politics full time, but he decided not to do that because that's not where his space was. That's not where he really had the best use of his talents and his abilities. Many of you are familiar with another name that was very influential in broadcasting back in the 60s and 70s, Johnny Carson. When we look at Rush Limbaugh and what Rush Limbaugh did for radio, Johnny Carson did that for late night television. When you look at Rush and you look at Johnny Carson and you look at entertainers like that, the biggest thing that stands out about these people is the fact that they have large personalities. But when you are listening to them, or in the case of when we're listening to Johnny Carson, we're watching him as well, you really are communicating one-on-one with that person. You know, if you think back when Johnny Carson was on television and you're watching him and Ed McMahon and all their guests, you really got a feeling that he was coming into your bedroom at night at 11 o'clock and that he was really a part of your family and he communicated with you very, very well. Same thing with Rush Limbaugh. When you talk to people who listen to the Rush Limbaugh show, they looked at it as Rush was talking to them individually. In fact, we see that locally when we talk about different people that are on radio stations across South Carolina. Donald talked about Gator 107 over in Myrtle Beach, and of course, Adam Dillinger over on Gator is a very well-known personality. If we look here in the Midlands, a gentleman that's been a part of the Midlands for a long, long time as an entertainer and somebody on the radio every day is Jonathan Rush with the Morning Rush, once upon a time on WNOK and now on WCOS AM. So these people were influential because they took a medium that we had that was pretty much dying due to lack of listenership. When we look at AM radio today, over the course of time that Rush Limbaugh was on it, it changed. And in the past 15 years, a lot of the stations that had Rush Limbaugh on their AM dial all of a sudden connected out and had Rush Limbaugh on their FM dial too, so that they were reaching people who were not just people listening to AM, but people who were listening to AM and to FM. You know, this one statistic kind of stands out, that AM's dying because of a lack of listeners. Only 10 to 20% of all radio listeners listen to the AM dial anymore. Kind of depends upon your locale. Some places have very large AM radio stations. When I say large, I'm talking about the amount of listeners they have. KDKA, for example, in Pittsburgh, that was the first commercial radio station that came on the air back in 1927. Radio stations like that are really, they stand out because they are the exception, not the rule. And in our business, if stations can't get listeners, then they can't get the advertising that keeps us alive as far as the way we do business. Most of the listeners that were on AM have moved to FM or to other radio sources, including satellite, internet radio. Things like iPods and smartphones have made that progression happen even faster than it was happening already. Is AM radio worth saving? That's a question that comes up in our basically conversations all the time. We feel it's a viable local community service. It serves the public interest in a lot of ways. It proves to be valuable in ethnic and religious populations as far as sports coverage and news and traffic and weather and sports. But there are some issues with the AM band itself that deal with noise issues and reception issues that do cause problems for AM radio. And as we look down the road, one of the things that we see is the ever-changing world within your cars where you're driving, where you have a multiple of entertainment sources. It used to be that the radio was home in your car and there wasn't anything else there. Nowadays, you can have AM radio, you can have FM radio. My car, of course, I have iHeartradio. Nobody'd be surprised about that, I'm sure. And we have radio that comes in from a lot of other sources, including XM. Something that's interesting that you may find, this is a little tidbit of thing. When we talk about XM radio, iHeartMedia is a shareholder in XM radio, and XM radio is a shareholder in iHeartMedia. All of us, as far as radio broadcasters and companies are concerned, we're working with auto manufacturers and radio manufacturers to determine what the future of entertainment is going to be over the next few years. And when we talk about those things, you know, the development of what you see in your car radios is actually several years down the road from what you see today or what you might see in the brand new cars that are coming out. Give you one example of that. This thing called iHeartRadio is absolutely great. We have over 125 million subscribers to iHeartRadio, and iHeartRadio allows you to listen to not only your favorite iHeartRadio station, but well over 600 other radio stations across the country that are owned by other broadcasting firms that you can hear on our platform. And you can hear podcasting and all kinds of different things. With the radio portion in itself, interesting thing that's going to be coming to a car near you in the near future. Volvo introduced it this year, where if, let's say you're listening to WCOS, you're here in Columbia, you're listening to WCOS, and you're going to take a trip over to Atlanta. Somewhere around Aiken, a little bit past Aiken, you're going to start to get a little bit iffy on the signal of WCOS. Well, if you're driving a new 2022 Volvo, that 2022 Volvo is going to pick up that signal has kind of dropped a little bit, and it's going to automatically switch you over to listening to WCOS on iHeartRadio. As far as you're concerned in the car, you'll just keep driving. You won't even notice that a change happened. So basically, you know, the technology is changing. And when we look at Rush Limbaugh, and we look at Rush Limbaugh's impact on our industry, I think the biggest thing that Rush Limbaugh did was Rush Limbaugh revitalized AM radio for a period of about 30 years. What's the future hold? He's not going to be here any longer. He's not going to be the one carrying that torch for AM radio. But there are other people out there who will. There'll be new entertainers that will be coming along. There'll be people who will discover something different. And hopefully along the way, they will keep AM radio as a viable medium. Most certainly, it's something that we don't want to see go away. There are different technological changes that are on the horizon for it. The FCC is looking at it from a bunch of different ways and trying to decide exactly what can be done to save it. Like any industry, as times change, we continue to move through and change with the times, and we have to look at different ways that we can approach the problems that we face every day in the business that we have. Got a couple of questions here. Can AM bands be used for other purposes? They've looked at some different things like that. There may be some repurposing of that down the road. It's a good question. There's some different things that the government is looking at as well to help with just the fidelity of the AM band, things that we can do from a technical standpoint. I won't bore you with it, but there's a lot more involved in the technology and the broadcasting of AM signals than there is in FM. You look at a lot of the tower arrays that you have, the directional possibilities of AM radio, the fact that you have to have huge grounding systems for AM radio. It's got a lot of challenges that we are working toward. A lot of new cars don't have cassettes or CD players. Everything's going to Bluetooth. Mobile media is probably going to be going that way in a big way. And the person that asked that question wants to know, is there something else being developed? There's always something else being developed. At this point, everybody in broadcasting, whether you're television or whether you're radio oriented, you're moving to the cloud. Everything in our lives is moving to the cloud. If you're a part of Microsoft 365, for example, on your computer, you're moving toward the cloud. All of your storage systems are going toward the cloud. So you'll see your personal computer is going to change over the next few years. So, it's going to be interesting to see that basically technology is going to take us in a different direction. A couple of other questions here. Although Rush had many opportunities to expand beyond AM, he stayed true to AM. He actually stayed true to what he did. It was more the broadcasters than Rush Limbaugh. It was the owners and operators of the radio stations that kept him on the AM band. And that goes back to the economics of what we do, the fact that we were looking to fill a void on that band. Here in Columbia, I have 8 radio stations that I manage. Of those 8 radio stations, 2 of those are AM radio stations, and one of them is WVOC, which we have a complementary FM radio station with that as well. WVOC's AM signal, it's a 5,000 watt signal. And what does that mean? That means that it covers about 3/4 of the state of South Carolina. So it is a fairly large AM signal, and it's a signal that we want to keep it as viable as we can for as long as we can. Keep in mind, we're fighting against people who are changing and going away from AM. In fact, you get over into Europe, for example, and they're not even putting AM radios in cars anymore. That's something that hurts our industry. So, when you look at Rush, he was first successful in AM radio because that's where talk programming was really at, was AM radio. And so the broadcasting industry really helped to keep AM radio viable by having him there. We started moving him to FM stations about 15 years ago. They didn't do that in every market. They did it in a lot of markets. And he was popular on FM, as popular on FM as he was on radio, on AM radio. Question that Mary asked, is there somebody waiting in the wings to take his place? There are several people that are in the wings. There are several people that are working on things. Rush was very interesting. He was influential in the business in the fact that he introduced several other people that are probably pretty close to household names today. People like Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck, Dan Bongino, or just a few that they started by having an opportunity to host or co-host a segment on Rush Limbaugh. So there are people out there from our perspective of what we're doing within our business. I'm not sure what the next step for us is going to be. Premier Radio Groups, which is a subsidiary of iHeartMedia, owns the rights to Rush Limbaugh's program. In the immediate future, what they're going to do is they're going to have a co-host on, a host on with the program. That person will then look at what's going on in the news of the day, and then they will be playing audio clips from Rush about those subjects. Now, don't know how long that's going to go forth. Obviously, I think his death was something that the company's been talking about for a long time, but they haven't had anybody that's really stood out to say, this is the person that's going to take the reins of that program. And at the end of the day, it's going to be people like you and me listening to the radio that are going to make a determination as to what's successful and who's successful. You're going to be listening to it, and you're going to decide that you like this person. You're going to gravitate to listening to the program. Are you going to feel the same way about a new person as you felt about Rush Limbaugh? Maybe, maybe not. You know, did you feel the same way about a Rush Limbaugh as you did a Paul Harvey? They were very similar types of people. They just had a different presentation. They were both entertainers. They both loved what they did, and they both had a huge impact on our industry. They come and they go, and we just have to look and see what's going to happen with tomorrow. And in our case, tomorrow comes at us every day in our industry with the changes that we have within the technology that are happening. So there will always be something out there for us that will be changing the way we do things that we do. I think probably I'll give you this one last example. I know we're running short on time. I'll give you one quick example. I got into the radio business basically working with one radio station when I got out of college, and worked on that radio station as a program director, worked on air on the radio station, did evenings, middays, mornings, and just really was involved heavily in programming. A few years later, I got into sales and marketing, and was selling that one radio station. Well, you fast forward to today, I have the ability to sell over 850 radio stations across the United States. Our company sells everything digitally that you might imagine. We are the largest operator and owner and seller of podcasting. And something you may find to be interesting is several of you may be associated with what's called OTT, digital connected television. That's something that when you're watching TV from your internet, not from your cable provider. We are, even though we are an audio company, we're the #1 provider of OTT advertising across the country. So we're into, I counted it up, this has been a couple of years ago, my people who work for me in sales and marketing have over 135 different things every day that they can sell to people. And only a small portion of those are really radio. It's all marketing. It's different. The AM radio band, the FM radio band, those things will change. I think that things like XM are here to stay. I think you're going to see AM and FM changing as well, and they're going to be around. It's just they might look a little bit different than what they look today. Don, did I answer some good questions there?
Very interesting discussion. I have to say thank you. And thank you again to Mary for arranging this. I think you covered everything I saw in the chat. So
there was one thing Pauline asked, are social media outlets, YouTube, podcast competition for radio?
Yes and no. I don't really look at them as a big portion of competition because social media is an extension of basically people reaching out to people. And that's what people on the radio do. The biggest thing that we have with what we do is we have personalities that are people talking to people. And we use that social media as an extension of what we do as well.
And then if you could answer the last question in the chat, we'll wrap it up with that.
The last question, Discovery Plus offers an advertising-free option. You're going to see that different platforms have advertising-free options. You can buy that should you buy into Pandora. You can buy that if you buy into the iHeartRadio app. But the thing is that you don't have to buy those services in order to get some of the programming. They're trying with Discovery Plus to get you to buy a service and not have any commercials, at least for the time being, in order to get you to enroll in that service. And that's how they'll hook you into it. Doesn't probably say in that agreement that you'll have commercial-free services forever, because at the end of the day, that's how our industry survives, is through the sale of those commercial dollars. And if we don't have that, then we really can't survive as a business model.
Thank you very much, Ron.
Thank you. Appreciate being here today.
Absolutely. All right, folks, this concludes our last CWRAP for the month of February. Are you kidding me? We will not be back till next Monday, which will be March the 1st. Are you serious right now? The year is flying by, folks. So if you're a president-elect, do not forget president-elect training this Friday and Saturday on Zoom. So, we had a nice crowd on here today, so I want to thank all of you as well for being here. We do this on Mondays now at 11 o'clock. So we look forward to seeing you back next Monday at 11. I'll conclude with the Rotary four-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill or better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Have a great week, folks. It's going to be a nice, sunny week. It's going to be warm. Get out and enjoy it. We'll see you back next Monday for the next conversation with Rotary Action People. Take care, folks. That's a wrap. Bye-bye.
Ron.